Hi, welcome to this introductory video for Goldstones pension spreadsheet, and I'm going to take you through my model. So I'm using a Mac and Chrome, but you can use any modern browser. And if you just open your browser and point it to goo.gl / capital A, capital F rather, I, capital D, O, capital Q, capital X, and then that should take you through to the model itself. So I'm just going to mag this up a little bit to make it a bit easier to see on the YouTube. So what is it? Well, the pension has changed a lot over the last decade, and it's complicated now. And this tool hopefully will introduce some concepts to you, such as annual allowance, which is a tax based on the growth of your pension or the deemed value of your pension every year. Something called pensions tapering, which was introduced in 1617. Lifetime allowance, which is a tax on the deemed value of your pension at the time of retirement. An actual reduction, which is a reduction in your pension if you go before state pension age. And a recent survey by the BMA showed that over 95% of people are planning on retiring before 65, so that's almost everybody. And some of these taxes you can pay via a loan, and it's quite an expensive loan called Scheme Pays, and that will reduce the value of your pension further. And all of these things interact in a complex way, and this model is to try and help you understand them. Each of the blue underlined topics will take you through to an authoritative source. So for example, if I click on that annual allowance, that will take me through to NHS pensions page on annual allowance, which has got further information on it if you want to do some background reading. So what isn't this model? This model is not independent financial advice. It's quite difficult to get independent financial advice around the pension scheme because it's quite complicated, and you may find that some IFAs and some accountants don't fully understand all of the aspects around the NHS pension scheme and some of the newer taxes such as pensions tapering. But nonetheless, it is important to get independent financial advice, particularly about some of those more complicated elements. So who is the tool designed for? So this tool will work for anybody with either a pure 1995 pension, if you were lucky enough to get protection for that, or if you've been transitioned forcibly from the 1995 section through to the new 2015 section. Currently, it doesn't work, unfortunately, for 2008 scheme members. And the model is optimised for consultants or hospital salaried workers, so it doesn't understand some of the nuances of GP pensions currently. So what do you need to use the model? Well, you just need a computer. It recommended that you use it in Google Sheets, but I have included a link to an Excel version if you prefer, but it's been fully tested in Google Sheets, and we'll show opening the model shortly. So before we get going with the model itself, I'll just talk you through the 6 things that you need to actually be able to model your pension. So the first thing you need is you need to understand your pensionable pay for the last 7 years, and that's a slightly odd number, but this is all based on something called carry forward for annual allowance, and to accurately work that out and make sure that you get all your available carry forward to limit the amount of tax you pay, you need 7 years of pensionable pay. And for most salaried doctors, that's easy to get from ESR. So if you just click through to the link and log into ESR, you should be able to download your pay slips and get your pensionable pays for the last 7 years. Now, because of a new tax called pensions tapering that was introduced in 1617, the amount of tax you pay on your pension is also based on your non-pensionable pay. And that's any PAs above 10, any income from outside medicine, such as rental income or private practice on which you pay tax, any additional sessions or waiting list initiatives, etc. It's also very important for the model, if you do have a 1995 component, to understand exactly how many years and days in service you have. Now, for most doctors that don't have added years, that's very easy to get because that will be on your current TRS statement. For people that do have added years, it's a little bit more complicated, and I'll go through that shortly. The model needs to understand at which point you became a consultant and when you expect to increment. And that's because your model will attempt to look at your future pension based on your predicted pay growth. And the month is important because if you're straightforward, an increment in April, that's great because it means that a pay rise will all occur in a single tax year. However, if you don't increment in April, the effect of that pay rise will be felt over more than 1 year, and that potentially could lead to, for example, an annual allowance liability in more than one tax year for each increment. Question 5 is a little bit easier. How old are you now? Or specifically the model asks how old were you on the 1st of April? And next, when do you anticipate you will retire? And that's because, as I alluded to earlier from that BMA survey, in the old days, most people went at 60. Most people now know that they're not going to work, or at least 95% of people know that they're not going to work to state pension age. So you need to think when you will retire to be able to model your pension, because all the factors such as lifetime allowance will be affected by the age at which you want to retire. So if you get all of those things, what will the model do for you? Well, principally this was designed to look at taxation initially, and it should be able to tell you whether or not you've got a past, current or future annual allowance liability. And unfortunately, virtually every consultant, certainly those that are in their 30s, 40s or early 50s, will unfortunately come into the remit of annual allowance bills. And it's also important to realise that if you haven't had one of those dreaded brown envelopes from NHS pensions which tell you you've got a pension savings statement and you might have an annual allowance liability, that you may still have a liability, because crucially the pensions people don't understand and don't have any sight of your non-pensionable pay. So that's why it's important to model it. It will tell you if you have a lifetime allowance liability when you intend to retire, because as I said, most people will be taking the actuarial reduction according to the BMA survey, and your LTA is assessed based on your reduced pension, not your full pension. So it's no longer straightforward to say that you've reached LTA because your pension is going to be reduced by the fact that you're going early. The pension will be able to model the effect of all of this, so your lifetime allowance, if you're actuarially reduced pension, and also if you choose to take a scheme pays loan, it will estimate based on certain predictions such as CPI of 2%, what that scheme pays loan will be worth and what your pension will be after all of those three major areas of reduction. And as I said, it will allow you to explore just how much scheme pays will end up costing you. So for some people who have a short loan and are expected to get an LTA liability when they retire, scheme pays might not be a bad idea. For younger consultants in their 30s or 40s that might have a loan of 20 years or more, it's almost certainly going to be a very, very bad idea to use scheme pays. One strategy that's talked about a lot on the medical forums and elsewhere is of coming in and out of the pension scheme repeatedly, and that's called hokey cokey, and there's quite a long section in the description of the model that talks about hokey, and the model allows you to explore whether or not that's something that might benefit you. And finally, we all get our annual TRS statements every year from NHS pensions, but that is no longer a very useful document. As I said, more than 95% of people will likely retire before they reach state pension age, and all of the figures in TRS are based on you going right up until your state pension age retirement. And so what the TSS does is it attempts to give you a simple text-based description of your pension based on going at 55, so that was the earliest age that you can retire in the 2015 section of the pension. 60 was the traditional age that people went in the 1995 section, and 65 just to be able to model the effect of working beyond the old traditional normal pension age of 60. So you may have been sent a previous version of the model, either as an Excel spreadsheet or as a link to a Google Sheet, it's recommended that you always go to the very latest version of the document by clicking the link that's in this document here. This will show you the previous versions, but we'll always have the link to the most readily available version. I've also included a link to Excel, but you can download the Excel version via the Google Sheets version anyway, and you don't need any special permissions from me or anyone else, and I'll show you how to download it. So we'll just click through now and I'll show you how to do that. So I'm just going to click through to that. I've deliberately not logged in as myself, just to show you what you will see. So I've now gone through to a read-only version of the current version of the model, which is 16.7. And from there I can say File, Download As, and do it as a Microsoft Excel document if I want, or if you prefer you can do it via Google Sheets, and to do so I'll need to sign in, which I do there. And then once I've signed into my own personal Google account, I now have the option to make a copy. So if I now click File and Make a Copy, and then if I call that my personal model, and then that will save that in my own Google Sheet, so I can access that from any of my machines or mobile devices and work on it as I wish. So I'll just close that old version, so I've got the current model, and then we can talk through this initial sheet, which is called Step 1 or Minimum Data Set. So on this initial sheet there are some fields that are in pink and they're mandatory, and some that are in blue and they're optional. So starting with an easy one, so that's age in whole years. You don't need to put half years, as at 1st of April 2018. For this next one, years in 1995 section, that's important to realise that that's at the end of March 2015. And the reason that date is chosen is that is when almost all people transitioned across from the old 1995 pension to the new scheme. Some people have transitional protection that meant that they didn't come over at that date, but again, if you still put in that value of number of years at the end of March 2015, and then you can change your year of transition down here. As I said, the year of consultant appointment is important, because then the model will be able to also predict your expected pay progression. So for example here, if I've put in 2012, I can see if I'm a consultant in England, I'm next expected to get pay progression in 2021 when I've been a consultant for 9 years, and then you can see down here in the future section on the line for 2021, it's put in a change of pensionable pay, and that changes the jump between the previous point of the consultant pay scale and the next point. Now, if you're not a consultant in England and you're on a different pay scale, that's not a problem. If in this pink cell here saying, are you a consultant, just set that to no, and all that does is it will take these values out for the predicted changes in pensionable pay, and they'll reset to 0 in a second, and then you can just put in manual pay progression. So for example, if you're on a different scheme in Wales or elsewhere, you can just put those changes in pensionable pay. So for now I'll just reset that to 1. So this option, optional added years, is here. So most people won't have added years, and that's fine. You can just leave these values here as they are and just make sure that the number of added years is set to 0. However, if you do have added years, for example here in this example, this consultant bought a contract age 30 to age 60, and for example if you put 6 in there, so if you purchase 6 added years purchased over 30 years, that would give them an extra 0.2 years per calendar year. But it's just important for people with added years to try and get the correct value for how many added years they had, or not how many added years, how many total years they had in the 1995 section at the end of March 2015. So if you have the TRS from 2014-15, that value will be on there. If you don't have that, I have included a little tool in here to enable you to work out that figure, which is linked at several parts of this document, which I'm just struggling to see at the moment. Where are we? Yeah, so if you click here, And then if you do have your pension savings statements for the 1995 section, you can put in the closing values on your pension savings statements with your pensionable salaries, and that will allow you to work out in this yellow cell the value that you should put in for 2014/15. So going back to the model, there's also an optional value here that can where you can put in a target pension. So if you think like over 50% of people in a recent survey on DNUK that you want to end up with a pension of around £50,000 in real terms, if you put that in, and then that can help you calculate that forward, including CPI, to work out at what age you would attain a pension that's worth approximately £50,000 today. So, as I said, because of pensions tapering, pensions taxation is no longer based purely on pensionable pay. So this pensionable pay you can get very simply from pay slips. So if I just scroll down to an example pay slip here. So this is just a standard pay slip that's downloaded from ESR, and then at the bottom left you should see the year-to-date balances, and if you're using the March pay slips, so this for example is a March 2012, that will give me my value for the 11/12 tax year, and where this red line is here would show you where your total pensionable pay is. And then you can also put in a value for non-pensionable pay. Now if you're a doctor that doesn't have any income outside the NHS, you can derive your non-pensionable pay by taking your taxable pay, adding in your employer pension contributions, and then taking off your pensionable pay, and that will give you a non-pensionable pay. But however, if you have any income outside of the NHS, you would need to also add that into your non-pensionable pay. So once you've filled in all of these pink cells, you should there be in a position to see whether the model is working for you. And you can do that by taking TRS, and I've just printed out my TRS from the 1995 section and from the 2015 section, and then you should be able to map those across to the relevant values on step 2A, which is the model which I'll discuss in the next video. So this is my TRS for the 17/18 tax year. So if I look in the column for the tax year starting 2017, I should be able to see that salary here would match what's called pay on the annual benefit statement, and similarly the values of the pension should match the values of the pension that are in the respective pension savings statements, which are here for the 1995 pension and here for the 2015 pension, and then there's also a value on the 1995 section for lump sum, and of course there's no automatic lump sum included with the 2015 pension scheme. So that's a basic quick whistle tour of how to get started with the pension model. Thanks.